In this video, we're going to learn how to create this shuffle cards interaction using JavaScript. So you can see how I can click on one of these cards and drag, and when I release it, it just goes behind all of the cards. It might look that it requires a lot of work, but it's not that difficult. However, there are several things we need to pay attention to while we are implementing it. For example, we need to make sure that when we release the card, it has the minimum distance of the card size, which means if I release it here, it should not go behind all of them. Instead, it should just get back to its original position. However, if we just exceed that distance, then if we release it, then it goes behind all of the cards. The other thing we need to pay attention to is to make only the top card draggable, which means if I try to click here and drag, nothing will happen. Only this top card is draggable. And we can also see that we are randomizing the rotation of each card. So if I reload, for example, here, you can see now we have a different rotation. If I reload again, there are different rotations. So this demo was inspired by this demo created by Bartek. So thank you, Bartek, for creating such a lovely demo. Lastly, we're going to use Veloxy for creating this interaction. Don't worry, it's not a complex tool if you are not familiar with it. It's only a few functions that we need to learn about in order to set up this demo. So without further ado, let's jump to the code editor. So to save some time, I prepared this example, but without any JavaScript code. So let's take a look first at the HTML. In the HTML, all we have is just a div with the cards class, and inside of it we are creating some card elements, like these. That's it for the HTML. Now let's go to the CSS and see it line by line. First, we are setting all elements to have border box for the box sizing. Then for the HTML and body tag, we are setting margin and padding to 0. We are setting some font family, and we are setting some background color for the page. For the body tag, we are just filling the body tag for the whole page, setting width to 100%, setting the minimum height to 100% of the view height, just to make sure that it's always filling the whole height, and setting the display to flex, and centering all the content. And that means the cards element will be centered here. But you can see that not all the elements are centered because they are displayed below each other. But we will fix that in a little bit. And for the cards element, we are setting the position to relative and the width and height to 200 pixels. In this example, I'm doing that instead of setting this width and height for each card element. So for the card element, we only have to set the width and height to 100%, and it will be the same as these two. Below that, you can see I commented this line, which is setting the position to absolute. I just needed to do this to show you how we have 4 cards here, but we will uncomment this in a little bit. We are setting top and left to 0. That will take effect once this is uncommented. And we are setting the font size to 50 pixels. We're setting color to some blackish color. We are setting some border, which is this border around the card. We are setting its display to flex and centering the content to make sure that the number is centered inside the card. We are setting some box shadow, and we are making sure that the user cannot select the text here. So you can see if I try to select, nothing will happen. And we are setting the cursor to pointer. So you can see this pointer cursor here. Now, just to make the demo a little bit fun, I just added a different color for each card here using this. So we are selecting the first element, setting its color to this red, also the second element to this color, the third element to this color, and the fourth element to this color. Okay, so now let's go and uncomment this. Now, after we do this, all the cards will be stacked upon each other. But now we are just doing everything in CSS and nothing is draggable or clickable. Now let's go and install Veloxy and see how we are going to create that interaction. So install Veloxy, I'm going to run pnpm install Veloxy. So I installed the latest version of this recording, which is 0.9.0. Now let's go to main.js. So this is the main JavaScript file we are including here. So you can see we are including it as a module. And inside of that, you can see we are importing the style CSS file. And below that, we can write all the JavaScript we need for this interaction. Now, first thing first, let's import Veloxy. To do that, let's say import, and we're going to import a function called createApp from Veloxy. Now, this is just the function that we use to create a new app instance for Veloxy. Let's call it and store that in an app variable. Let's say createApp. And what we're going to do with this app is that we need to run it. And we can do that using app.run. So now we have a Veloxy app instance and it's running. Now the way Veloxy works is that we need to implement each interaction inside a plugin. So everything is included in a plugin, so it's easy to share and it's easy to reuse. So let's create a new plugin and let's create a new file here. Let's call it shuffle card plugin.js. What is a plugin here? It's just a function that Veloxy takes and executes. So let's define a function. We're going to call it shuffle card plugin. And it's just a function that accepts some parameter, and it's called context. Now for each plugin, we have to give it a name. And to give the function a name, you can just say shuffle card plugin dot plugin name, and let's give it the name of shuffle card. So we need to give it a name so we can use it in the HTML code. So let's save this and go to the HTML code. And the idea here is that once you create a plugin, you have to assign it to some element. And in this case, I'm going to give it the cards element because this is just like the root element for the whole demo. And to assign it to this element, we're going to say data vel. Now you will notice that every single data binding is prefixed with the word data vel. Now let's say plugin, and let's give it the name we gave it here, which is shuffle card. Okay, so now the plugin code is assigned to this element. Next thing we need to do is to give this element a view name. To give it a name, we're going to say data vel and view, and let's give it the name of, let's just say cards. So we needed to give it a name, so in the plugin we can access this element using this name. But for this demo, we actually don't need to access this element. What we need to access is all of these cards, so we can change their position, rotation, or anything we want. Now to give it a name, all we have to do is just to do the same thing. Let's copy this, and let's paste it here. And instead of calling it cards, because it's just a single card, we're going to call it card. Let's save. Now I'm going to show you an example of how we can access these views. So let's go to the plugin, which is shuffle card plugin. And inside this function, we're going to write our code inside a setup function. So let's say context.setup. And in this function, we can do all the preparation code for this interaction. Now what we're going to do is to fetch all these cards and console log them. So let's say cards, context, get views. And the name is card. So we have this function get views, which is going to take a name and returns all the views that have this name. Now we have another function called get view to return a single view, but in this case we're going to get all the cards. Now let's try and log this. Now if I reload, you will see nothing here because I have not added this plugin to Veloxy yet. So it's just a function and we actually didn't export it or do anything with it. So let's export this function. And inside main, let's import it, shuffle card plugin. And to add the plugin to the Veloxy app instance, all we have to do is app.add plugin, and let's add shuffle card plugin. Now let's reload, and you can see we are logging all the cards views. So you can see this is the first one. If I open it and try to hover over here, it's going to hover over this element. Now you don't need to understand what a view is, but all you have to know is that once we assign a name to one of these elements, it's going to be converted to a view in the terms of Veloxy word. Actually, to be more accurate, you don't have to give it a name to be converted to a view, because any child of this element, because this is what we call the root view, is going to be turned to a view. So you don't need to know more about this. It's just the idea that now we are encapsulating this element inside a view object that we can do cool stuff like update the rotation or the position and do anything else. Cool. Now we have access to all of these cards. Let's try to do the first thing. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the rotation of these cards. So let's go to the plugin and do that. Now let's loop through all of these cards. Let's say cards.forEach card. And what we're going to do here is to say card.rotation.setDegrees. So this function takes just some kind of degree value and it will rotate this view. So let's say we're going to rotate it with 10 degrees. If I do this, you will see all of them are rotated with 10 degrees. Now if I do -10, it's going to be the other way. So what about if we just randomize that? And for each card, it will have a different degree value. We have a function that Veloxy gives us, which is just returns some random number between two numbers. And that function is called random number. But first we need to import it. So let's say import, and it's inside utils from Veloxy. So it's just a helper function to make things easier to work with. So we're going to have a random value between -10 degrees to 10 degrees. So let's say between -10 degrees to 10. Now if I reload, nothing will happen because we need to use it off of this utils object. So let's say utils.random number. If I save, you can see now we have a different rotation angle for each one. If I reload again, it's different. If I reload again, it's different. Cool, so that's the first step. Now, the second step is that we need to make this card draggable. In Veloxy, to make some card draggable, we have the idea of event plugin. So what that means is that we have some kind of a plugin that we can use inside this plugin that takes care of something that only emits some events. I know that it sounds confusing, but it's actually much easier when I show it to you. To get a plugin event, let's say here const drag event plugin. It's just a variable, and we're going to say context.use event plugin, and we need to import that. And in Veloxy, we have an event plugin called drag event plugin, which is responsible for all the dragging stuff. So let's say drag event plugin, but we need to import it. So let's say drag event plugin. Now we need to listen to some event on that event plugin by saying drag event plugin dot on, and the event we're going to listen for is drag event. And also we need to import this. So let's say drag event, and let's import it there. And on that, we're going to call a function called onDrag. Let's define the function here, onDrag. Now this function takes an event object, which we're going to use in a little bit. Now when the card is dragged, we're going to console log this object. So let's say console log event. But that's not enough because we need to tell this event plugin which views it should work on, which means we need to tell it that we need to apply the drag event on these card views. So it's easy. All we have to say is drag event plugin.add view. And the view is a card. And we're doing this inside the for loop here. So it's going to be added for each card view. Let's reload and let's open up the console div. If I click and drag, you can see we are logging the event object here. But that's not enough. What we need to do is we need to drag this card. And it's very simple to do. All you have to say is get the card view. We can do this by saying card equals event.view. And then say update the position of this card by saying card.position.set. And we're going to set the x and y values. So let's say x, and the value is going to be event.x. And for y, it's going to be event.y. Let's save and try. You can see now we can drag this, and we can drag also any other card. Now what we need to do is that once you drag a card and you release it, it should go back to its original position. And we can do that by checking whether we are dragging or not. To do this, let's say if event.isDragging, then we are going to update the position of the card. Else, which means that the user has released this card, we're going to say card.position, and there is a function called .reset, which would reset the card position to its original value. Now let's save and see. I click, drag, and release, and it's going to go back to its original position. You can see how it works. But of course, we don't want it to return immediately like this. We need to apply some animation. Luckily, in Veloxy, you can add any kind of animator you want to any view by doing the following. Let's go to the card inside this setup function, and let's say card dot, and we're going to apply some animation to the position property. You can see that in Veloxy we have multiple properties, like for example we have card.position to update the position, we have card.rotation to update the rotation, and what we need to do is to access the position property and say set animator. And the idea here is that we have several different kinds of animations, and we're going to choose one of them by saying tween. So we have other ones like instant, which means there's no animation, we have dynamic, and we have spring. But for now, we're going just to use tween. Now, if I save, just by adding this line, let's see what we'll have. If I click and release, you can see we have now animation. But one issue you can see is that we are also animating it when we are dragging it. But we only want to animate it once we release the card. And that's very easy to do by adding false for the second parameter. If I save and try, you can see how it works. Now, the reason it works like this is because the second argument here determines whether we need to run an animation or not for this change. So in card.position.set, we are setting the position. We are changing the position property for the card. If we set it to false, then we say you can change this position but without running an animation. Now, if I set it to true, it will run the animation like before, and that's the default value. Now, for the else, we are calling reset here, and it also can take a value of true or false whether you want to run the animation or not. And again, true is the default value, and that's the reason why it just returns with an animation. Now, one cool thing about animators here, for example, for the tween animator, you can define an easing function. And if you are familiar with the easing in the animation world, it's the same idea. So you can define an easing function by saying ease, and the function will take a time, And let's say we're going to use t times t. So you can see now it will be different. You can see it just starts slow and then speeds up. And we can also change the duration of the tween. So let's say, for example, duration is going to be 200 milliseconds. It's going to be faster. Maybe that's better. Now let's get to the second section of this interaction. Now the second thing we need to think about is that we need to change the z-index for each card once we release it. So the idea here, we are using the absolute position for each card. And based on the order of each card, the z-index will be different. And if I go to elements here, you can see inside this container, we have these 4 cards, and this one will have lower z-index than this one. That's why you are seeing the 4th one as the top one. But we can't just keep it like this because we need to change the z-index explicitly so we can easily change it from top to the bottom. So first things first, we need to assign a z-index for each card inside this loop, because in this place we are doing all the preparation and the initial values for each card. So what we're going to do, we're going to say card dot. Now you can change any style property you want using card.styles, and let's call z-index. Now the value here would be based on the order of the card. Now we can access the order from the index. So if we say I, this is going to be the index. So it will start from 0 to 3 in this example. And let's set it here by saying I. If I save, let's see each card here. Now you can see we have z-index of 0, the second one 1, then 2, then 3. Now in order to make this card go behind all of these cards, we need to change the z-index like the following. For example, when I do this, it will change the z-index of the first one to 1, and this will be 2, and this will be 3, and this will be 0. So you can see we are incrementing each one by 1, and then the last one will just go back to the first one, which will be 0. And we can achieve this easily by using the modulus operator, and I'm going to show you that in a little bit. Now the place we're going to add this code for incrementing z-index is in the else statement here. Because like in the if, we are checking if the user is dragging the card. Now in the else, it means that after the user releases the card, and in this moment, we need to move the z-index of each card so it appears as if the card is going behind all the other cards. So what we need to do here is to loop through all the cards to update their z-index. So let's say cards, but now we don't have access to the cards here. And to have access to that, we can move this to a global variable for this place. And we can just remove const here and move the declaration here. So let's say let cards. So this variable now will contain the value of this, which is getting all the card views. So let's say cards dot for each card. Now we need to update the z-index by saying card dot styles dot z-index like before. But now which value? Let's say here just z-index. Now the value of this variable is going to be const z-index of getting the current z-index of the card and then incrementing it by 1. And to get the current one, we're going to say card.styles.z-index. In this case, it's going to be a string, so we have to convert it to a number by saying, for example, just plus, that will convert it to a number. And then we're going to increment 1. And to use it here, it has to be a string, so we will convert it back to a string by doing this. But actually that wouldn't work because for the last card, instead of going back to 0, it's going to go to 4. But to make it go back to 0, we can do this trick. We can say this and say modulus and the total number of cards. In this case, it's 4. Or we can just simply say cards.length. Now doing this trick will always ensure that all the z-index will be either 0, 1, 2, or 3. And when we increment 3, it's going to wrap around to the first position. So let's save and try. If I click drag release, it will go behind them. And the same for the other one, and then this one, and then this one. Yeah, it works for all of them. But there's a simple issue here, is that if I click and I don't drag far enough, it will also go behind all of them. But actually that doesn't look nice. Now before making it go back, we need to make sure that we have dragged enough distance here. And the best distance here is just to make sure that we have dragged over the size of the card. To fix this, we first need to get the distance. And for the drag event plugin, it's very easy to do so. Let's say distance, and we can get this from event.distance. So this will return a number for the distance that we dragged here. So let me show you an example. If I log this value, Now if I click drag and release, it will tell you it has a distance of 284. Now if I drag list distance, it will tell you, for example, 79. So what we need to check is that if the distance is more than the width and height of the card, then we will allow it to go behind all of the other cards. And we know in this example that the width and the height is 200 pixels, so we can simply just check if it's more than 200 pixels. So let's say this. If the distance is more than 200 pixels, then let's update the z-index. Now let's try. If I click and I release here, it will just go back to its original position without moving it back behind all the other cards. Now if I drag more than that, it will go behind all of them. Yeah, so that works. Now I don't like to use magic numbers here, so instead of just saying 200 pixels, we can just get that number from the card view. So let's say card.size.width, and that will return 200 pixels. Let's try that again. Yeah, it works. Now we are almost done. Now the last thing we need to take care of here is to make sure that we can only drag the top card here. So let's try to, for example, click and drag the green one, and you can see how it works. But actually that's not what we want. Now there are several ways to do this, but the simplest one is just to check whether we are dragging the last card or not. And in this case, the last card is the card with the highest z-index value. Now let's read the z-index of this card. So remember, this card view is the view we are currently dragging. So let's get its z-index by saying z-index card.styles.z-index. And let's convert it to a number. And we need to check if the z-index is not the highest possible value, and in this case the highest possible value is 3. Because remember, we start from 0 to 3 and we have only 4 cards here. So if it's not 3, then just return, which means we are not going to execute any of these code. Let's save and try. If I try to drag the orange one, it works because it's the top card. Now if I try to drag the green one, it doesn't work. Now let's move it. Now we should be able to drag the green one and so on. And finally, we got it working exactly like the demo. Now the only difference here is that I'm just displaying numbers here instead of images, but you get the idea. You can update it to whatever you want and it will still work the same. I hope you learned something new here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section of this video. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.